The key turned before Rosamond understood that the hand upon it was her sister's. She heard the bolt drag home in the old tower door, that low iron cough the lock gave when it had not been oiled in a season, and she was across the little round room and pressing her palms to the wood before her breath had caught up with her feet. Cassandra, she kept her voice level, because a raised voice through 6 inches of oak only entertains the person on the other side. Cassandra, open the door. This is not amusing. No, her sister said, quite pleasantly, from the stair beyond. It is not amusing at all. It is a great deal of trouble, in point of fact. But it will be worth it when I am a duchess. The word landed in the dusty warm air and hung there. Duchess. Rosamond set her forehead against the wood and made herself count the grain of it. 3 ridges. A knot. A 4th ridge. The way she counted anything when the ground tilted. He offered for me, she said. He offered for a signature. A rustle of silk against stone, Cassandra had sat down on the top step, settling in as though for a comfortable coze. He offered for a great many clever letters signed Miss Vane. And I, dearest, am also Miss Vane. The elder, in fact. It is only proper the elder should go first. Through the single arrow-slit window, a bar of July sun fell hot across Rosamond's wrist. Below the tower the park lay green and shimmering with heat haze. She could smell the roses of the lower garden even up here, and cut grass, and the faint sweetness of the lime avenue where the bees worked all afternoon. Somewhere a wood pigeon repeated itself with idiot patience. It was the loveliest summer Wexcombe had seen in years, and her sister had locked her in a ruin at the edge of the park to steal a man who had never in his life laid eyes on either of their faces in full daylight. He will know, Rosamond said. Julian will know within an hour of speaking to you. He will know a beautiful woman blushed and lost her tongue. The silk rustled again as Cassandra rose. Men forgive that so readily. They call it modesty. And by the time he wishes for conversation, we shall be wed, and a duke does not unwed himself over a want of wit. He learns to dine at his club. Rosamond's fingers found the letter in her sleeve. The last one. The one she had carried on her person for 11 days, because she could not bear to leave it where a maid might find it. The paper had gone soft as cloth at the folds. She did not need to open it to see the lines. You write as though the world were a thing that might still be argued with, he had written, in that black slashing hand that pressed too hard on the down strokes. I confess I had forgotten what it was to be argued with. Do not stop. How long? She asked. How long do you mean to keep me here? Until it is done. A pause, and then, because Cassandra had never in her life been able to resist the last flourish, the announcement is tonight, you know. In the long garden, under the lanterns, when the dancing pauses. Half the county is coming to watch a duke choose his bride. I did think you would like to know the hour of it. You always did like to know the hour of things. The bar of sun crept off Rosamond's wrist and onto the straw. She listened to her sister's slippers go down the curling stair, light and unhurried, and then the far door at the base of the tower groaned and thudded, and a second bolt shot home. And there was nothing left but the pigeon and the bees and the enormous golden indifference of the afternoon. She did not weep. She turned instead and looked at the room that was to hold her. Really looked at it. The way one looks at a coach one must ride a long way in. It was a poor cell. The old watchtower had not been lived in since their grandfather's day. It held a broken loom, a heap of apple crates gone to splinters, 3 empty wine bins furred grey with dust, and a truckle bed someone had dragged up here for a gamekeeper, who had long since gone. The one window was an arrow slit a hand's breadth wide, glazed with a single warped pane through which the world came in bent and gold. The door was oak 2 inches thick, and beyond it the stair, and beyond the stair a second door as stout as the first. She had heard both bolts. She was thorough about such things. It was, her father used to say, her besetting virtue, and her chief inconvenience. Rosamond sat down upon the edge of the truckle bed, spread the soft letter open on her knee, and set her mind to work, not on her sister, who was past arguing with, but on the hinges, the bolts, the crates, the slit of window, and the 6 hours of daylight she had left before the lanterns were lit. She was still Miss Vane. The elder had merely forgotten that the younger had also been raised by a man who mended his own clocks. The heat thickened as the afternoon wore on, and the tower held it like an oven holds bread. Rosamond took off her fichu and rolled her sleeves and went over the room inch by inch, because a mind given a task cannot at the same time give itself to despair, and she had learned that trick very young. The door was hopeless. She granted it that within the first quarter hour. The hinges were on the stair side, the bolts were beyond reach. But the crates were pine, dry as tinder and light, and among the splinters she found a length of iron that had once been the loom's shuttle bar, a foot of blunt metal, warm from the day, satisfying in the hand. She weighed it and thought of the window. The arrow slit itself no grown woman could pass, but the frame of the little glazed pane was set in soft old lead, and lead is a patient metal, and she was a patient woman. She began to work the tip of the shuttle bar into the seam. She had been at it perhaps an hour. Her palms printed red with the effort and a fine grit of old mortar in her teeth, when she heard the base door groan again, not the great bolt, but the little wicket set into it, and a voice she knew hissed up the stair. "Miss Rosamond? Miss Rosamond, are you up there then?" The shuttle bar went still in her hand. "Bess?" Oh, thank goodness. Feet on the stone, quick and light, and then a small freckled face at the crack of the upper door where the wood had warped away from the jamb. An eye, a snub nose, a wisp of ginger hair escaped from a cap. Bess Ferriby, the under housemaid, 14 years old and out of breath. "I brought you bread and a bit of the cold fowl and a jug. I said I was taking scraps to the dogs." And cook never looks. "Miss Rosamond, what have you done that she's put you up here?" "Nothing that need trouble you." Rosamond knelt at the door and put her hand flat against the crack, and after a moment a smaller hand pressed the other side. "Bess, listen to me. Who has the keys to the base bolts?" "Miss Cassandra's got 'em on her own chatelaine, miss. She never set 'em down all day." "And Mr. Pruitt the steward, he's been told nuns to come near, on account of you being poorly, she says. Brain fever, she told the hall. She said you was raving, and might do yourself a mischief, and it was kindest you was kept quiet and dark." The eye at the crack blinked, indignant. "You don't look poorly to me. You look cross." "I am extremely cross." Rosamond found, to her surprise, that she could smile. "It is a much better thing to be than poorly. Bess, can you get the small food hatch open? The one at the bottom of the door, that they use to pass the gamekeeper his supper through." A scrabbling below, a rusty shriek of a little iron flap. Bread came through, and a wing of fowl wrapped in a dock leaf, and the neck of a stone jug. Rosamond made herself eat, because a body works better fed, and while she ate she talked, low and steady, and Bess listened with her ginger head tipped to the hatch like a robin. "You cannot free me," Rosamond said. "The bolts are too much for you, and I will not have you turned off. Or worse, for my sake. But you can carry a thing to the lower garden tonight, when the guests are come. Can you do that?" A folded paper. To the tall gentleman in the dark blue coat. The Duke himself. Bess, no other hand. Though you have to spill a whole tray of ratafia to reach him. To the Duke. Bess breathed it as though Rosamond had said to the king. "Law. And what'll it say?" "The truth," Rosamond said. "In as few words as I can make the truth go." But even as she said it, she was turning the shuttle bar over in her grazed fingers and looking past the door to the warped little window with its patient lead, and doing the sum that she had been doing all afternoon under everything else. A note might miscarry. A note might be taken. Cassandra had planned a locked door and a story of brain fever. She would not have neglected the possibility of a folded paper. There was only one messenger Rosamond trusted entirely to reach the long garden by the hour of the lanterns, and she was sitting on a broken gamekeeper's bed with lead grit under her nails. "Bess," she said slowly, "how high is the ivy on the north face?" "The old ivy, by the buttress." A silence. Then, in a much smaller voice, "Miss Rosamond, that's a terrible long way down." "Yes," said Rosamond, "it is. Eat your supper going back, so cook sees empty hands. And bring me, if you can, and only if it costs you nothing, a needle and the strongest thread in the still room, and your second petticoat, if you can spare it. I mean to write my note. I only mean to carry it myself." The lanterns went up at 8, while the sky was still washed pale gold in the west, and the swifts were screaming their high circles over the chimneys of the hall. Rosamond watched it all from the arrow slit, cheek pressed to warm stone, the bent gold pane laid carefully aside on the sill, where her hour's work had at last coaxed it free of its lead. A hand's breadth of window. Not enough to pass, but enough to reach an arm through, and feel the outer air move cool against her skin, and take hold of the first rope of ivy as thick as her wrist that clung to the old grey buttress. Below, the long garden of Wexcombe filled with light and colour, like a bowl filling with water. She could see the little coloured lamps strung between the yews, the pale shapes of gowns moving on the grass, a fiddle and a flute tuning, thin and sweet across the park, the long supper tables gleaming with plate under the trees. She could see, near the terrace steps, a knot of the greatest guests, and among them one tall figure in a coat of so dark a blue it was nearly black, standing a little apart with his hands clasped behind him, and his head bent to listen to a woman in silver. Even at that distance, even by lamplight, Rosamond knew the set of those shoulders. She had never touched his hand. She had danced one half-dance with him at a crowded assembly in the spring, in a press of people and a fog of candle smoke, and had spoken to him afterward only in ink. And still, she knew him. The way you know a line of a song from its first 3 notes. The woman in silver laughed and laid her fingers on his sleeve. Cassandra, of course, Cassandra, in their mother's silver tissue, playing the modest bride. Something in Rosamond's chest went very cold, and very still, and very clear. She drew back from the window and turned up her sleeves the rest of the way. She had spent the last of the light on Bess's needle and the strongest still-room thread, sewing the 2 petticoats into one long crooked rope of knotted cotton, testing each knot against her own weight braced in the doorway. It would not carry her the whole height. It did not need to. It needed only to carry her past the sheer stretch of the buttress to where the ivy grew thick, and after that she would trust her hands, and her nerve, and the fact that she had climbed every tree and half the roofs of Wexcombe before she was 10, and had never yet let a height tell her what she might do. She knotted one end to the iron loom frame, and set the frame crossways over the arrow slit within, where it caught snug against the stone and could not pull through. She fed the pale rope out into the dark. She tucked the Duke's soft letter into her bodice, over her heart, where it belonged, and put one leg through the window into the warm summer night. "Well," she said aloud, to no one, in the empty tower, with the fiddles starting up their first true air below, and her sister's laughter carrying up thin and silver through the dark. "Either this is very brave, or it is very stupid. I shall know which in a moment." And she went out into the air. The stone was still warm from the day under her scrabbling shoes. The knotted cotton took her weight with a groan of thread that stopped her heart for one full second, and held. She went down it hand over hand, the mortar grating her knuckles, the whole vast summer night breathing around her, smelling of cut hay and stocks, and the green sap of the ivy she was climbing toward. Her arms shook. A swift stitched past her ear so close she felt the wind of it. She found the first thick rope of ivy with her foot, and then with her hand, and let go of the cotton, and gave herself to the old growth, and it took her like a ladder, twig and stem and clinging root, down and down the cool north face where no lamplight reached, until her shoes struck the flag at the tower's foot, and her knees folded, and she knelt a moment in the dark, wet grass, with her heart going like the fiddle's fastest reel. Then she got up. She was Miss Vane, and there was an announcement to interrupt. The park lay between her and the garden, a quarter-mile of dark lawn and blacker trees, the hall's lit windows floating gold above it all. She went at a run, keeping to the shadow of the lime avenue, her ruined slippers soaked through with dew in 20 paces, her breath tearing, the music growing louder and the light growing warmer with every stride until she could hear voices in it, and glasses, and the particular expensive murmur of a great many well-dressed people being agreeable to one another out of doors on a summer night. She came up out of the dark against the yew hedge at the garden's edge and stopped there, one hand on the clipped green wall, chest heaving, to take her bearings and to look, for one moment, at the thing she had climbed out of a tower to break. It was very beautiful. She would grant her sister that. The long garden glowed. 200 candles in colored glass swung gently in the yews. The tables shone. The dancers had paused, and a space had cleared on the grass before the terrace steps, and up on the steps stood Cassandra in their mother's silver, and beside her, tall and grave and entirely deceived, the Duke of Ashcombe with a glass in his hand and a question in the set of his shoulders that no one else seemed to see. An elderly gentleman with a great voice, Pruitt had found a bishop somewhere, was climbing the steps to make the announcement. The murmur was dying. Faces were turning. Somewhere near the tables a small ginger-headed housemaid stood frozen with an untouched folded paper crushed in her fist, having plainly failed a dozen times to reach the great blue-coated gentleman through the crush, and looking about now with the wide despairing eyes of a child who has been trusted and cannot see how to keep faith. Rosamond caught Bess's eye across the whole bright garden. She shook her head once, never mind the paper, and stepped out of the shadow of the yew into the swimming lantern light, and every candle in the garden seemed to lean toward her at once. The bishop had got as far as, "My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my very great honor to make known to you the betrothal of his grace, the Duke of Ashcombe to Miss Vane," Rosamond said. She did not shout it. She had told Bess that a raised voice does no work a clear one cannot do better, and she found it was true, even here, even now, with her hair half down, and grass to her knees, and her heart slamming. The two words dropped into the hush, and carried the length of the garden as though the summer air itself had chosen to bear them. "He is betrothed," she said, walking forward onto the cleared grass, into the full blaze of the lanterns, so that 200 faces swung to her, and the fiddle scraped to silence, and her sister's painted composure cracked straight down the middle like a dropped plate. "To Miss Vane. And I am afraid, Your Grace, I am so very afraid that you have got the wrong one." The Duke of Ashcombe turned, and for the first time since a crowded half-dance in the spring, in the honest gold light of 200 candles, Julian's eyes found her face, and stopped. The silence held for the length of a breath, and then it broke into 100 whispers at once, a sound like wind moving through the yews, and every fan in the garden seemed to lift at the same instant. Julian did not whisper. He did not move at all, save that his hand set the glass down blind upon the balustrade, where it tipped and rolled and shattered on the terrace stone, and no one so much as glanced at it. He was looking at her across the cleared grass, as a man looks at a word he has read 100 times in a letter and never once heard spoken aloud. "Say that again," he said. His voice was low, but the garden had gone so still that it carried. Rosamond walked closer, out of the shadow of the yew and into the swaying coloured light, and she was aware of how she must look. Hem black with dew to the knee, one sleeve torn at the shoulder, a graze of old mortar down the side of her jaw, her hair coming down in a dark rope over one shoulder. She was aware of it, and she found she did not care in the least, which was itself a novel sensation. "You wrote to Miss Vane," she said. "For 11 weeks you wrote to Miss Vane. You wrote that the world was a thing that might still be argued with. You wrote that you had forgotten what it was to be argued with, and that I was not to stop." She heard the whole garden catch its breath at the "I," and let it. "I did not stop, Your Grace. I have not stopped yet. Your Grace. Cassandra's voice came down the steps like a dropped tray of glass, bright and cracking. Your Grace, forgive her. I told you my sister was unwell. Brain fever. The physicians have despaired. She is not accountable. She does not know what she says. She knows precisely what she says. Julian had not looked away from Rosamond's face. I have 11 weeks of evidence that Miss Vane knows precisely what she says. It is the single most reliable fact I possess about her. I am Miss Vane. Cassandra came down another step, silver tissue whispering, her chin high and her beautiful mouth steady, and Rosamond felt a cold flush of pure admiration for the sheer nerve of her sister, who could stand under 200 pairs of eyes, with the ground giving way beneath her slippers, and not once let her voice shake. I am the elder. The letters were signed Miss Vane. And I am Miss Vane, and this poor creature is my sister Rosamond, who has been kept quiet and apart for her own protection, and who has plainly climbed out of a window and run half across the park in a fever, and I will thank you all not to feed her delusion by standing here and gaping at her. It was very good. It was almost good enough. Rosamond watched a dozen faces near the tables turn from herself to Cassandra and soften with the beginning of belief. Because a woman in silver tissue on a terrace step is a great deal easier to believe than a woman with grass to her knees, and she understood with a lurch that beauty and composure were themselves a kind of argument, and that her sister had never in her life lacked either. Ask her something, Rosamond said. Julian's head turned a fraction toward her. You have 11 weeks of her, Rosamond said, and her voice was steadier now, because a mind given a task cannot at the same time drown. You have 11 weeks of what Miss Vane thinks. Ask her something only Miss Vane would answer, and ask me the same, and believe the one who answers true. You are a duke, Your Grace. Surely you may keep the whole company waiting the space of one question. Something moved behind his grave eyes, something that was almost, in that terrible moment, amusement, though it did not reach his mouth. The Wexcombe living, he said. In my third letter I asked Miss Vane what she would do, had she the giving of a country parish and a middling sum, and no one to please but herself. He looked from one sister to the other. What did she answer? The garden held its breath. A lantern swung. Somewhere in the dark a nightingale, indifferent to dukes, began to sing. Cassandra's chin lifted. I said I should give it to a deserving young man of good family and sound principle, she said, as any sensible woman would. I said, Rosamond said quietly, that I should give it to the curate, who had done the work of it for 9 years, while the pluralist who held it drew the income and lived at Bath. I said, the deserving young men of good family had quite enough already, and that principle was cheaper to praise than to pay for, and that, if you meant to be shocked, Your Grace, you had better be shocked at once, and save us both the trouble of a correspondence. For a moment, nothing happened at all. Then, Julian of Ashcombe put his hand over his mouth, and above it his eyes had gone bright, and Rosamond understood that the grave tall duke, whom half the county had come to watch, was trying, and failing, not to laugh in front of them all. Yes, he said into his hand. Yes, that is very nearly word for word what she wrote. She added that I might keep my shock, as she had no earthly use for it. He lowered his hand. He was not laughing now. He was looking at Rosamond, as though the whole bright garden had emptied of everyone but the two of them. You had no earthly use for it. I have not changed my opinion, said Rosamond. No, he said. I did not imagine you had. Cassandra made a small sound. It was not a large sound, a catch of breath, no more. But Rosamond heard it, and knew her sister as she had known her for 25 years, and understood that the retreat had begun, and that it would not be a graceful one. This proves nothing, Cassandra said. Her voice had dropped its brightness. It had gone flat and careful, and that was worse, because the bright Cassandra was performing, and the flat Cassandra meant every word. She has read my letters. She has been in and out of my rooms all summer, prying, jealous, sick with wanting what was mine. Of course she can quote a line or two. It proves she is a thief and a spy, Your Grace, nothing more. Cassandra. Rosamond said it gently, and that gentleness cost her more than any shout would have. Do not. You have gone as far as you can go, and one step further will take you off the edge. Stop now, and I will tell them all it was a jest between sisters that ran away with itself, and no one need be shamed. I am offering you that. Take it. For one instant. She saw her sister waver. She saw the girl who had taught her to plait rushes by the mill stream flicker up behind the woman in silver tissue, and she thought, absurdly, of the two of them small and freckled and inseparable. Before their mother had begun to say the elder is the beauty, and the younger is the clever one, as though a person might be only one thing. Then, the flicker went out. You always did want to be the good one, Cassandra said, low, so that only Rosamond and the Duke could hear. Even in ruining me, you must be gracious about it. No, I will not take your mercy, Rose. I will not be the mad sister in the story you tell for the rest of your life. She lifted her voice, and it rang out clear and carrying, and perfectly composed once more. Your Grace, I withdraw. I will not press a suit where my own sister's illness has made such a spectacle. Marry whom you please. But you should know before you choose that the letters you love so well were not written where you think, nor entirely by the hand you suppose, and that this house has more of a secret in it than a locked tower. Ask her about the winter of the year 6. Ask her who taught her to write like that. Then decide how much of Miss Vane you truly know. And she gathered up the silver tissue in both hands and went up the terrace steps with her head high and her back straight, a bride uncrowning herself before the whole county could do it for her. And she did not look back, and the crowd parted before her and closed behind her, and did not know whether to pity or applaud. Rosamond stood in the ring of lantern light, with the words dropping through her one after another like stones into a well. Ask her about the winter of the year 6. Ask her who taught her to write like that. The cold thing in her chest, which had held so clear and so steady all through the climb and the run and the confrontation, cracked very quietly down its center. Because there was a secret. Her sister had not invented that, whatever else she had invented. There was a secret in the winter of the year 6, and it had to do with the way Rosamond wrote, and she had carried it so long and so deep that she had almost forgotten it was there, and Cassandra, in going down, had reached out one last time and set a slow match to the one thing that could still bring the whole night to ruin. Miss Vane. She came back to herself. The garden was murmuring, moving. The bishop had descended the steps looking as though he had swallowed a wasp. Footmen were converging on the shattered glass. And the Duke of Ashcombe was standing directly before her, close enough now that she could see the tiredness under his gravity, and the small nick on his jaw where he had shaved badly, close enough to see that his dark blue coat was very fine and very plain, and that he wore no ornament at all but a single mourning ring gone worn and thin. You are hurt, he said. He was looking at the graze along her jaw. It is mortar, she said. The tower needs pointing. I shall mention it to the steward. His mouth twitched. You climbed down a tower. There was a window, and there was ivy, and there was an announcement I did not care for. She discovered that her hands had begun, now that there was nothing left to do with them, to shake. It seemed the shortest way to correct a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. He looked at her a moment longer, and then, quite deliberately, he stepped, so that his shoulders came between her and the greater part of the staring garden, giving her the yew hedge at her back and himself as a wall before her, and lowered his voice to something meant for her alone. Miss Vane, there are 200 people watching us, and a bishop who came a great way for nothing, and your sister has just fired a parting shot over her shoulder that I do not in the least understand, but that has turned you the color of that hedge. I am going to give you my arm. You are going to take it. Because a woman who has climbed a tower may certainly be permitted to lean on a duke, and we are going to walk toward the house at the pace of two people who have all the time in the world, and you are going to tell me what to do next. Because I find, and here his grave voice did something odd, roughened at the edge. "I find I have wanted for 11 weeks to be told what to do next by the woman who wrote those letters, and I have only just discovered I may look at her while she does it." Rosamond looked up at him. The lanterns swung their colored light across his face and away again. Somewhere behind them the fiddle, uncertain, began tentatively to play, and the murmur of the crowd rose to cover the silence, and the warm night smelled of trodden grass and hot candle wax, and the stocks along the border breathing out their sweetness into the dark. "You believe me," she said. It was not quite a question. "I believed you at Miss Vane," he said, "and every word since has been the confirmation of it. Yes, I believe you. I am, God help me, entirely without doubt of you, which is a most uncomfortable condition for a man who has spent his whole life being taught that certainty is vulgar." He offered his arm. "Now take my arm, Miss Vane, before you fall down, and let us disappoint the county by walking away, instead of providing it a second act." She took his arm. It was solid under her hand, the fine cloth warm from the night, the muscle of it steady, and she leaned on it more than she meant to, and the steadiness of it went up through her palm and into the place where her nerve had been failing, and shored it. They walked. The crowd parted. She felt the eyes. She kept her chin where her sister had kept hers, and let the Duke of Ashcombe set the pace, unhurried, as though they two had indeed all the time in the world, and no interest whatever in the opinion of anyone in it. The winter of the year 6, he said, low, when they had passed beyond the last of the lanterns, and were climbing the shallow steps to the dark terrace. "You need not tell me. But your sister meant it to be a knife, and I would rather you put it in my hand yourself than let her throw it from a distance later, where I cannot see where it lands." Rosamond's fingers tightened on his sleeve. Below them the garden glittered. Above them the great house rose black and gold, its long windows spilling light onto the stone. A footman had opened the terrace door and stood waiting, too well trained to look at her ruined him. "Not here," she said. "Not with 100 people to hear it carried in. But I will tell you. You have the right of it. I will not let her throw it." She drew a breath that shook only a little. "Is there somewhere in this crowd of your engagement that a duke may take a woman with grass to her knees and not have it in every drawing room in the county by Sunday?" "There is a library," said Julian, "that I was shown this afternoon by a steward who was very proud of it, and that I should think not one soul in this house has entered for pleasure in a decade. It has a door that locks." He caught himself. She felt him catch himself, felt the flush of it in the arm under her hand. "From the inside. By your hand. I only mean that no one will disturb us, and that you will hold the key. I am making a great mull of this. I have written 11 weeks of tolerable sentences, and I cannot, it seems, speak 3 in a row without wanting them back." And Rosamond, muddy, grazed, her whole life turned over in the space of an evening, her sister's slow match burning somewhere behind her toward a secret she had buried for 11 years. Rosamond laughed. It came out of her ragged and surprised, the first laugh of the whole long day, and it startled them both. "That," she said, "is the most heartening thing I have heard since the bolt went home. Yes, the library. Give me the key, Your Grace, and let us find out how much of Miss Vane you truly know." The library was cool and dim, and smelled of leather and dust and the particular dry ghost of old paper. And when Julian had lit a branch of candles from the fire the steward had built against the summer damp, the gold light climbed the shelves and lost itself in the high dark, and the noise of the garden fell away to a muffled thread of fiddle music through the shut window. Rosamond turned the key in the lock herself, as he had said she might, and the small definite click of it settled something in her chest. "Sit," Julian said. "You have been standing on the strength of your own quarrel for an hour, and it is running out." There, he drew a great worn chair to the hearth, and she sank into it, and he did not sit, but stood with one arm along the mantel, watching her, and the morning ring caught the firelight thin and worn on his hand. "My father mended clocks," Rosamond said. It was not where she had meant to begin, but it was where the truth began, so she let it. Julian did not interrupt. She had noticed that in his letters, the long courteous silences where another man would have crowded in with his own cleverness, and she found it was the same in the man. He was a gentleman, she said, and a poor one, and he ought to have been a clockmaker, for it was the only thing that ever made him wholly happy. He mended the whole county's clocks for the love of it, and charged nobody, which is one reason we were poor. And he taught me, because I sat quiet and had steady hands, and Cassandra could not bear to sit still. He taught me the works of things, how a thing that seems whole is only a great many small pieces trusting one another to hold, how you may take anything to bits, if you are patient and not afraid of it, and learn why it does what it does. She looked into the fire. He died in the winter of the year 6. Of a chill that went to his chest, in the cold, when we had not coal enough to keep 2 fires, and he would have his in the workshop where the clocks were, and not in the parlour where his daughters were. He chose the clocks. He always did. I do not say it to grieve you. I say it because you asked who taught me to write as I do, and the answer is a man who taught me that everything, is only its parts, and may be understood, and mended, or if it cannot be mended then at least seen clear. She turned her head and met his eyes. So that is the winter of the year 6. It is a sad little story and there is no shame in it, but it is not the secret my sister meant. That comes after. Julian said nothing. He had gone very still against the mantel. When my father was gone, Rosamond said, there was a debt. There is always a debt. And there was a gentleman of the neighbourhood, a Mr. Harlan, a man of business, 40 and a widower, and not unkind, but a man who bought and sold, who held the debt, and who let it be known that he would forgive it, entire, if he might have Cassandra. She was 18. She was the beauty. She would not. Rosamond's mouth curved, without much humour. She raged and wept and would not, and I did not blame her, and our mother had no more power over Mr. Harlan than a moth over a lamp. So I did the thing my father had taught me. I took it to bits to see why it did what it did. And I found that Mr. Harlan did not truly want a wife of 18 who hated him. He wanted to be answered. He was a clever man in a county of dull ones, and he was lonely in his cleverness, and no one had written him a true sentence in 20 years. She drew a slow breath. So I wrote to him. As Cassandra. In her name, in a hand I taught myself to make look like hers. For 3 months, all one winter, clever letters, arguing letters, letters that took his own arguments to bits and handed them back to him, mended. I made him not love her. I made him respect the mind he thought was hers. And when a man respects a mind, your grace, he cannot in honour ruin the house that holds it. He forgave the debt. He asked nothing. He moved to Bristol in the spring and married a widow of his own years, and I have his last letter still, in which he thanks Miss Cassandra Vane for the finest conversation of his life, and never once knew he had been talking, all that winter, to her little sister of 16. The fire settled. A coal fell. The fiddle music threaded thin under the door. So that is the secret, Rosamond said, very quietly. That is what she meant. I have written in her name before. I have made a man believe he was courting Cassandra Vane when he was reading me. I did it once to save us, and I would do it again, and it is the cleverest and the most dishonest thing I have ever done, and my sister has just told 200 people, and you, that I am a woman who counterfeits her hand and steals her name and makes men love a lie. She lifted her chin. She has told you the truth in order to make me a liar. It is very like her. I taught her that trick, I think, though I did not mean to. She made herself look at him then, and it was the hardest thing she had done all night. Harder than the window, harder than the walk through the eyes. Because she had climbed a tower on the strength of 11 weeks of ink, and it was only now, watching the firelight move on the grave, still face of a man who had every reason to wonder which Miss Vane he had truly been writing to all summer, that she understood how much she had wagered, and how easily she had just handed him the means to believe he had been made a fool of twice over. Julian was silent for a long moment. Then he pushed off from the mantel and crossed to her chair. And to her astonishment, he went down on one knee before it, not as a suitor, but as a man bringing his eyes level with hers, and he took the worn mourning ring from his own hand and turned it in his fingers. "This was my mother's," he said. "She had it made for her own mother, and it came to me because I was the one who sat with her, at the last, when my brothers found the sick room tedious. I have worn it 8 years. And I tell you this because you have just given me your father's clocks and your Mr. Harlan and your counterfeit hand, all your works laid open on the table, and I will not take that and give you nothing back but a duke's careful silence." He looked up. "I am not troubled that you wrote to a lonely man in your sister's name to save your family. I am, Rosamond. I am undone by it. Do you understand? You are describing to me the most frightening thing I have ever heard, which is a person who cannot be lied to, because she takes the world to bits and sees the works, and you imagine it will send me away." He shook his head slowly. "It is the reason I could not stop writing. I have been lied to charmingly my whole life. You are the first person who ever argued with me instead." Rosamond's throat closed. "You do not mind," she said, "that the woman you have been reading all summer is a woman who once made herself into someone else so well that the man never knew?" "I mind," Julian said, "very much, that anyone ever made you do it. As for the rest," and here at last the grave mouth turned up at one corner, dry and warm and entirely his own, "I confess I am relieved. I had begun to fear you were merely good. A merely good woman would have been a sad disappointment after 11 weeks of that correspondence. I find you are a great deal more dangerous than good, and I am absurdly, improperly glad of it." And Rosamond laughed again, and this time it did not come out ragged. It came out warm, surprised into being, and she saw it land on him like sun on cold stone, saw the tiredness ease at the edges of his eyes, and for one moment in the candle-lit dust and leather quiet, with the key turned in the lock by her own hand, and the whole disastrous glittering night shut out beyond the door, she let herself believe that the works of this too might be understood, and mended, and made to run true. Then the handle of the door turned. It turned, and found the lock, and stopped. And a voice came through the oak, not Cassandra's, not Bess's, but a man's, smooth and pleasant and utterly certain of its welcome. A voice Rosamond did not know, and that made Julian come up off his knee in a single motion, all the ease gone out of him, and something cold and braced come into its place. "Ashcombe," said the voice through the door. "Ashcombe, they tell me you have shut yourself in the library with a young person who came out of the shrubbery. I do hope you have not done anything your trustees will have to unpick. Open the door. There's a good fellow. It seems your bride has changed her face since supper, and as the man who is to have the funding of this marriage settlement, I really think I had better meet the new one." Julian's jaw had set hard. He looked at Rosamond, and there was apology in it, and warning, and something that was almost fear on her behalf. "My uncle," he said, low and fast. "Lord Peverell. He holds the strings of the estate until I am 30, and he did not want me to marry at all. And if he learns tonight that the bride is not even the woman the settlement was drawn for, but her sister, with no fortune and a counterfeit hand in her history," he stopped. "Rosamond, whatever he says, do not take him to bits in front of him. He is the one man in England who will understand exactly what you are, and he will not be undone by it. He will be armed." The handle turned again, harder, and from beyond the door Lord Peverell's pleasant voice said, gently, as though to a child, "I can wait all night, Ashcombe. I have nothing whatever to do until morning, but decide whether to sign your happiness or starve it. Open the door." Rosamond looked at the key in the lock, and then at Julian, and then at her own 2 hands, which had climbed a tower and mended a debt, and were, at present, perfectly steady. "You are telling me," she said, low, "to sit quiet and let a clever man decide what I am. I am telling you, he is dangerous. So am I. She rose from the great worn chair, and the ache of the climb sang in her shoulders, and she ignored it. You said so yourself, not 5 minutes gone. You said you were improperly glad of it. She crossed to the door and set her fingers on the key, and paused there with the cold brass biting her palm. I will not take him to bits, Julian. I give you my word. But I will not let him take me to bits either, and think me a spread-out clock he may name for himself, while I lie on the table. He may meet the new bride. Let us see which of us she frightens more. She turned the key. The door swung, and Lord Peverell came in on a breath of the garden's cooling air and a wash of candle smoke, and Rosamond's first clear thought was that the family had all been cut from one bolt of cloth. He had Julian's height, and the same dark hair gone a distinguished silver at the temple, the same grave good bones. But where the nephew wore them like a weight patiently carried, the uncle wore them like a well-fitted coat, easy, pleased, entirely at home in the wearing. He was past 50 and beautiful still, in the cold burnished way of a coin much handled, and his eyes when they found her were kind, which was the worst of it. She had expected contempt. She had not prepared for kindness. Ah, he said, and shut the door behind him with the soft click of a man who preferred his conversations private. There you are, the young person from the shrubbery. How do you do? I do very well, my lord. Rosamond dropped him the exact curtsy her mother had drilled into her at 8 years old, no deeper. Rosamond Vane. Vane, he said it as one tastes a wine of uncertain year. He drew off his gloves, finger by finger, watching her over them. Not, I collect, the Miss Vane for whom my nephew's people spent a fortnight drafting settlements. That would be the sister who has gone up to her room in your mother's silver to be sick with humiliation. You are the, what did the footman call you, the one who was poorly? Brain fever, I heard. Kept quiet in a tower. He smiled. You do not look poorly. You look as though you have been climbing. I have been climbing. Down, I should think, rather than up. Up is easy. Anyone may go up in a temper. It is coming down that wants a head. He laid his gloves upon the reading table, precisely, side by side, and turned the full warmth of his attention upon her, and Rosamond felt it as a physical pressure, like the flat of a warm hand against the breastbone. I like you already, Miss Vane. I want you to understand that, because in a moment I am going to be very unkind to you, and I should hate you to think it personal. Uncle, Julian had not moved from the hearth, but something in his voice put a hand on the room. You will speak to her as you would speak to me. I never speak to you as I speak to you, dear boy. You would faint. Lord Peverell did not so much as glance at his nephew. He pulled out the reading chair and sat, unhurried, and crossed one leg over the other, and the firelight ran up the silver buckle of his shoe. Sit, Miss Vane. No, you would rather stand. Steady hands, straight back, chin at the angle your sister uses when she lies. I see the family resemblance runs deeper than the nose. Very well. Stand, and I shall be brief. He steepled his fingers. My nephew, he said, came into his title at 19, which is a foolish age to be given anything larger than a horse. His father, my elder brother, left the estate encumbered past its eyebrows, and left me trustee of the whole encumbered mess until Julian should reach 30 and be, in theory, old enough to ruin it himself. That is 5 years hence. Until then, not a field is let, not a mortgage is served, not a marriage portion is settled, without my hand on the pen. You follow me? Perfectly, said Rosamond. You are the works, and he is the face on the dial. Something flickered behind the kind eyes. Surprise, quickly folded away, and beside the fire she heard Julian make a small sound that might, in a lighter hour, have been a laugh. How very apt, Lord Peverell said softly. Yes, I am the works, and works, Miss Vane, do not run on sentiment. I came here tonight to see a suitable, dull, well-dowered young woman signed into the family. A woman whose settlement I had already read and approved. because it brought in the £11,000 this estate requires by Michaelmas to keep its head above the water her late father-in-law flung it into. £11,000. That was the Miss Vane in the silver tissue. She has a great aunt in Shropshire with no other heir, and a weakness for pretty nieces who marry well. He unlaced his fingers and spread his hands. And now I am shown, instead, a second Miss Vane, out of a tower, with grass to her knees, and I am given to understand, not £11,000, but 11 shillings to her name. So you will forgive me if I do not embrace you as a daughter. The fire ticked. Outside the shut window the fiddle had found its feet, and a country dance had begun. Rosamond could hear the shuffle and stamp of it faint through the glass. 200 people determined to pretend the evening had not just come apart in front of them. She stood very still and let the numbers settle through her, because numbers were only parts, and parts could be understood. "You have not asked," she said, "whether he wants her." "I never ask what a man of 25 wants. It changes with the moon and costs whatever it happens to cost." Lord Peverell tilted his silvered head. "You imagine I am cruel. I am not cruel, Miss Vane. I am arithmetical, which the young always mistake for cruelty, because it will not be argued out of a sum. There are 400 souls on this land who eat because the accounts balance. When the accounts do not balance, they do not eat. I have buried the difference before, in a bad year, and I did not enjoy it, and I will spend a great deal, including my nephew's happiness, including your good name, including this rather touching scene I have interrupted, to avoid burying it again. Now," he reached into his coat, "shall I tell you what I know, or shall you tell me, and save us both the pretense?" He drew out a folded paper. It was old. Rosamond saw that from across the room, saw the softened grey of it, the way the folds had gone furred with handling, the way one corner had been mended long ago with a wafer of paste. Her heart, which had held so level through the tower, and the walk, and the whole bright ordeal of the garden, gave one hard sideways lurch, and then went cold and quiet, the way still water goes quiet before it shows you the bottom. "You know the hand, I think," said Lord Peverell gently. "Where did you get that?" Her voice came out level. She was proud of that, distantly, as one is proud of a servant who does not spill the tea though the house is burning. "Bristol." He turned the folded letter in his fingers without opening it, and the firelight caught the thin, worn ghost of the direction inked across the front. "A man of business named Harlan passed some years ago and left his papers to a nephew, and the nephew, being a nephew, sold the interesting ones. This one has been interesting to me for 3 months, since first your sister's name was put before my solicitor. I make it my habit, Miss Vane, to know the woman before I fund the wedding. I had this read by a man who reads hands for the courts. He tells me the letter is signed Cassandra Vane and written by someone else. A younger someone, a careful someone, teaching her fingers to lie." He looked up. "And tonight a younger, careful someone comes out of a tower and tells a garden full of witnesses that she is the true author of a duke's love letters. You are not a difficult sum, my dear. You never were. You are simply one nobody troubled to add up before." "Uncle," Julian came off the hearth at last, and there was nothing easy left in him at all. He had gone white about the mouth, and his hands had curled. "That is enough. Whatever is in that letter, it is 11 years old, and it saved a family from ruin. And if you mean to use it to—" "I mean to use it," said Lord Peverell, "without heat, to keep 400 people fed. Sit down, Julian. You are frightening the candles." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Rosamond thought, with a strange far-off clarity, that she had met this trick before. In her father, in herself, the quiet that comes of never once having doubted you will be obeyed. "I have no wish to ruin anybody. Ruin is expensive, and it satisfies only the vulgar. I have, instead, a proposal. Miss Vane, will you hear a proposal? You are fond of them, I gather. You have been reading my nephews for 11 weeks. Rosamond's mouth was dry. She thought of Bess's water jug, gone hours ago, She thought of the graze along her jaw, which had begun, now in the warmth of the room, to sting. She made herself unclench her hands. "Say it," she said. Here it is, then, laid out plain, as one clockmaker's daughter to a man who admires a clean mechanism. He recrossed his legs. "The great-aunt in Shropshire will settle her £11,000 upon a niece who marries a duke. She does not, I have taken pains to establish, greatly care which niece. What she cares for is the word Duchess in the family Bible, and a portrait of the wedding over her chimney-piece. So, your sister marries Julian, as arranged, as the settlement is drawn, as the money requires. And you," the kind eyes rested on her, almost tender, "you go on doing what you have done so beautifully all summer. You write. You think. You argue with him. You are the mind of the marriage, in ink, at a discreet distance, precisely as you were the mind of Mr. Harland's near ruin of your house. Your sister is the face and the fortune. You are the works. Everyone is provided for. It is, if you will permit me, the most efficient arrangement I have ever had the pleasure of designing, and it has the great merit of requiring absolutely no one to be ruined." The silence that followed had a texture to it, thick and warm and smelling of leather and burnt tallow. Somewhere very far away the country dance turned itself over and began again. Rosamond looked at the old grey letter in his hand. Her father's hand had shaped her own. Her own had shaped the forgery. The forgery had saved them. And now the saving had come round the long way, across 11 years and the width of England, to sit in a stranger's fingers and be offered back to her as a cage. Everything is only its parts. She heard her father say it in the cold workshop, with his breath smoking. She heard the enormous indifference of the sum. "You have thought of everything," she said. "It is my calling. Everything but the one thing." She lifted her chin. "You have not asked him." And she turned from the fire and the letter and the arithmetical kindness of Lord Peverell, and looked at Julian. He was standing very straight against the shelves, in his dark plain coat, with the worn ring on his hand, and the candlelight moved on his face and did not soften it, and she saw, with the pitiless clear sight her father had ground into her, that saw the works of things whether she willed it or no, she saw that he was afraid. Not of his uncle, of the sum, of 400 souls and £11,000, and a bad year with a shovel in it. She saw that the man who had written "Do not stop" was standing in a room where every reason in the world told him to stop, and that he had not yet found the sentence that would let him refuse them, and that the not finding was tearing him. "Julian," she said, very gently, "look at me." Not at him. At me. He looked. "He is offering you the safe thing," she said. "He is offering you your tenants and your accounts and your name unspotted, and a wife who will smile in the silver tissue and never once take you to bits, and a mind you may go on visiting in the dark by candlelight whenever you weary of her. And it costs you nothing but the truth. I want you to understand that I understand it. I have added the same sum. I added it in the tower this afternoon, before I ever touched the ivy. I know exactly what I am worth in pounds, your grace, and it is 11 shillings, and I know exactly what she is worth, and it is 11,000. And I am not such a fool as to pretend the difference does not signify to 400 people who did not ask to be born on your land. Rosamond. Let me finish. She said it quietly, and he stopped, because she had asked him to, and that small obedience undid her far worse than any refusal could have. I climbed down a tower tonight, she said, because I could not bear to let a lie be spoken over lanterns and stand for truth for the rest of both our lives. I did not climb down it to walk into a cleverer lie with the ceiling higher, so I will not stand in a garden as the Duchess and be a counterfeit, and I will not stand in the dark as the pen and be a secret, and if those are the only two shapes this can take, my lord, then you have not designed a marriage. You have designed a very tidy way to make me spend the rest of my life doing again the thing I did at 16 to keep a roof from falling. Writing love in another woman's name to a man who does not know he is speaking to me. Her voice did not break. She was almost sorry it did not break. A break would have been easier to bear than the steadiness. I did it once. I will not do it twice. Not even for 400 people. Not even for you. The fire snapped. Lord Peverell, in his chair, had gone very still, and the kindness had faded from his face into something more attentive, the look of a man who has laid a trap for a hare and finds a fox in it. "That is a fine speech," he said slowly. "You have your sister's carriage and none of her folly. It is a pity. Under other stars I should have enjoyed knowing you a great many years." He tapped the old letter once against his knee. "But you have not, I think, entirely grasped your position, Miss Vane. So let me be arithmetical one last time, and then I shall leave you to your night. I hold a paper that will see you named, in every drawing room from here to town, a forger of hands and a stealer of names. That is not a scandal a woman recovers from. That is a thing that follows a family into the 3rd generation. Your sister's chances end with it. Your mother's peace ends with it. And my nephew, should he be so romantic as to marry the forger over the fortune, finds himself wed to the most notorious woman of the season, cut by every hostess who matters, and without the £11,000 his land requires by Michaelmas, which means the very tenants you are so tender of go into the winter cold." He rose, unhurried, and gathered his gloves. "So, you will not be the Duchess, and you will not be the pen. Admirable, but you have 3 doors in this room, Miss Vane, and I have just shut 2 of them, and behind the 3rd is ruin for everyone you climbed that tower to protect. I do so wonder which you will choose. Sleep on it. I sign the settlements at noon." "You will not sign them at noon." It was Julian. He had not raised his voice, but he had come away from the shelves, and he came between Rosamond and his uncle the way he had come between her and the garden, his shoulders squaring, his body a wall. And Rosamond saw, in the set of it, the same motion she had watched from the arrow slit hours ago, and known across a 1/4 mile of dark, the shoulders she had known from 3 notes of a song. "You will not sign them at noon," Julian said again, "because I will not sit at your table at noon to put my name under yours. You forget, uncle, in all your arithmetic, that the settlement wants 2 signatures, and one of them is mine, and I am 25, not 15, and a man may be kept from his money without being kept from his conscience. Dear boy." Lord Peverell looked genuinely pained. "You cannot fund a marriage on conscience. I have watched better men than you try." "Then I shall be the worse man who would not," Julian said, "and we shall see which of us sleeps." But Rosamond saw his hand, at his side, close and open and close again, and she knew, because she could not help but know, because the seeing was in her whether she willed it or no, that his uncle had scored, that under the fine defiance the sum was still there, 400 souls and a winter and a shovel, and that a man may mean every word of a brave sentence, and still lie awake beneath the weight of what it will cost the people who trusted him to keep the accounts balanced. Lord Peverell saw it too. Of course he saw it. He was the works. He drew on one glove, and then the other, and he smiled at his nephew with something that was almost affection, and entirely without mercy. "Noon," he said. "I shall have the papers laid ready, and the pen inked. Come, or do not come. But understand, both of you, that I do not require your consent to protect this estate. I require only your absence, and your absence I can arrange. If the true bride will not have him, and the false one may not, why, there are other heiresses, and a Duke of 25 is not so very unmarriageable once a season's talk dies down. I can wait. I have nothing to do but wait and hold a purse and a paper." He inclined his silver head to Rosamond, courteous as a dance. "Good night, Miss Vane. You were the most interesting 1/4 hour I have spent in a 12-month. I am sorry it must end in a sum. It so often does." He let himself out. The door closed behind him, with the same soft, deliberate click with which it had opened, and his footsteps went away down the flagged passage toward the noise and the light, unhurried. A man with all the time in the world, and both the doors that mattered, locked in his own coat. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The fiddle music came thin through the window. A coal broke and sifted down through the grate, and the branch of candles guttered in the draught the open door had let in, and the great dim shelves climbed away into their high darkness, indifferent as the summer had been indifferent above the tower. Rosamond found that she had sat down. She did not remember sitting. Her legs had simply reached the end of what they would do, and the worn chair had been there, and now she was in it with her grazed hands open in her lap, and the whole vast weight of the sum settling over her like the heat had settled over the tower. Slow, thickening, inescapable. "He is right," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her, far away. "That is the worst of it, Julian. He is not lying, and he is not even wrong. There are 400 people. There is a winter. There is a paper in his coat that can end my mother's life in the county, whether the courts ever touch it or not." She looked at the fire. "I stood in your uncle's face and told him I would not be a counterfeit, and I would not be a secret. And I meant it with my whole heart, and none of it changes the sum by a single farthing. He can wait. We cannot. That is his advantage, and it is a true one." Julian crossed to her. He did not kneel this time. He stood over her, and then he did a thing that no man of his rank had any business doing before a woman with grass to her knees and 11 shillings to her name. He took up her grazed right hand in both of his, carefully, as though it were the works of something he was afraid to break, and he turned it over and looked at the mortar-torn palm that had climbed down out of a tower for the truth. "Tell me the one thing he did not think of," he said. "You said it to him. You have my whole attention, and I warn you it is not a thing I give lightly. What is the one thing?" Rosamond looked up at the grave, tired face bent over her hand, and past it at the shut door and the shut window, and the 200 candles she could no longer see burning themselves down in the yews for a betrothal that had come apart on the grass. Somewhere out there her sister was being sick with humiliation in their mother's silver. Somewhere out there Bess was carrying an undelivered note in a crushed fist and not knowing whether she had failed. Somewhere in Lord Peverell's coat a soft grey letter 11 years old was waiting to do again. The long way round, the work it had first been made to undo. And somewhere under all of it, she felt it now, the way you feel a wheel begin to turn before you hear it. There was a part nobody in this room had yet added into the sum. Her father's voice came up out of the cold Year 6, patient, unhurried. "You may take anything to bits, if you are patient and not afraid of it, and learn why it does what it does." "The letter," she said slowly. "The one in his coat. He had it read by a man who reads hands for the courts, and the man told him it was signed Cassandra, and written by a younger someone." She lifted her eyes to Julian's, and something old and clear and dangerous was waking in them. The look of a woman who has just seen the one small piece the whole mechanism turns upon. "Julian, he is so very sure it is my hand that ruins me. He has not once asked himself the other question. He has not asked whose hand it clears." The fiddle stopped between 2 bars, out in the dark, and started again, and the candles leaned in the draught, and beyond the locked library door, a clock somewhere in the sleeping house began, unhurried and exact, to strike the hour. 12 strokes, unhurried, each one dropping into the dim room and dissolving in the leather and tallow quiet. Rosamond counted them the way she counted anything when the ground tilted. 3, a breath, 4, and by the 9th she had it whole, laid open before her like a clock with its back off and every wheel at last in view. "He read it wrong," she said. "Julian, your uncle read the whole letter wrong, and he is a man who does not read things wrong, which means he was so pleased with the one answer that he never turned the paper over." Julian had not let go of her hand. The candle branch guttered, A thread of blue smoke climbed from the shortest of them and bent in the draught. "Tell me slowly. I am a duke. We are trained to be slow." He had the letter read by a man who reads hands for the courts. She turned her grazed palm inside his, so their fingers laced, and the small warmth of that steadied the racing thing behind her ribs. And the man told him it was signed Cassandra and written by a younger someone. "Your uncle heard Forger. He heard a knife to put to my throat. He did not hear the other half of the same sentence." She looked up. "That man, set beside your summer letters, the ones you have from Miss Vane, the 11 weeks of them, that same man will swear on the same oath that one hand wrote both. The Harlan letter, and yours. One hand, Julian, mean." She felt him go still, the way the garden had gone still when she stepped out of the yews. "Cassandra stood on your uncle's terrace tonight," Rosamond said, "and told 200 people that she wrote to you. That she is the mind you love. The letter in your uncle's coat is the one document in England that proves she did not, and that I did. He is carrying the proof of my claim about in his own pocket and calling it my ruin." A laugh came up in her, low and astonished. "He brought the evidence to hang me, and it clears me instead. He only has to open his mouth in one drawing room, and the very first question a clever hostess asks is whose hand, and the answer damns his own niece, and marries you to the truth. And the forgery itself." Julian's voice had roughened. He will say the word. "Forger. It follows a family into the 3rd generation." His words. "Say it then." Rosamond rose, because the sum would not let her sit. It wanted her on her feet, moving, the blood going. She crossed to the cold hearthstone and back, her ruined slippers whispering on the boards. "Say Forger, and you must say the whole of it or none, for half a story is a lie with better manners. A girl of 16, whose father was newly in the ground, wrote clever letters to a lonely man of business to talk him out of taking her family's house for a debt. No coin changed hands that should not have. No one was cheated of a farthing. Mr. Harlan lost nothing but an argument he had lately grown fond of losing, and went to Bristol and married a widow and thanked Cassandra Vane, in ink, for the finest conversation of his life." She turned. "Your uncle cannot whisper Forger without a listener saying whom did she forge, and why, and what was taken, and the answers are nobody, to keep a roof up, and nothing at all. That is not a scandal. That is a penny ballad about a good daughter, and the Tun will weep into its ratafia and invite me to dinner." The fire snapped. Julian was watching her with the particular arrested attention of a man who has just seen a locked room prove to have a door. "You are frightening," he said softly, "exactly as I was warned." "I have not finished." She came back to him, and now the last wheel turned, the one that fed the others. "The money, Julian. He hung the whole marriage on £11,000 and a great aunt in Shropshire. And he told us himself, he could not help telling us, he is proud of his own thoroughness, that the aunt does not greatly care which niece wears the coronet. She wants the word Duchess in the family Bible and a wedding over her chimney-piece." "Well," Rosamond spread her hands, "we are 2 nieces of one great aunt. The 11,000 does not attach to Cassandra. It attaches to the marriage. Whichever of us you wed, the settlement comes to the estate, and your 400 people eat, and the accounts balance to the penny your uncle loves so well." She let it land. "He designed a sum with 2 answers, and only ever added up one of them." "He can wait," he said. "He does not need to wait. Neither do we. There is money for a bad winter whichever sister stands beside you, and only one of them is the woman you wrote, 'Do not stop.'" For a moment Julian said nothing at all. The muffled fiddle found the end of its air and let it go. Then he lifted her mortar-torn hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to the grazed heel of her palm, once, gravely, as a man sets a seal to a thing he means to keep. And Rosamond felt the whole long day come apart in her chest and reassemble into something she had no name for. "There is one part left," she said, unsteadily, and it is the part I cannot do with arithmetic. Cassandra. Cassandra. She drew her hand back, not from him, but toward the door, toward the pale summer dark, already thinning at the window's edge. The sum balances without her. But I will not walk into that room at noon over my sister's face, Julian, and be the good one who won. That is the story she is most afraid of, and I find, God help me, I am afraid of it too. If I take everything and leave her the shame, I have not mended the clock. I have only stopped the hand I did not like. She lifted her chin. I climbed down a tower so that no lie would stand for truth tonight. I am not going to let a truth stand for cruelty by morning. I have to go up to her before the house wakes. It is nearly light. He said it not to stop her. She saw, only to be sure she knew the cost of the hour. She will not thank you. No, Rosamond agreed. She will not. That is rather how I shall know it needs doing. She unlocked the library door with her own hand, and the cool passage air came in smelling of stone and dew, and the guttering candles of a party that had at last gone home. Wait for me. When the house comes down to break its fast, we will go and take your uncle to bits together, gently, so he cannot say we were unkind to him while he ruined us. The upper passages of Wexcombe were grey and hushed, the long windows filling slowly with the pearl-coloured light that comes before a hot day, and somewhere below a single housemaid was already raking a grate, the small iron scrape of it the only sound in the sleeping house. Rosamond went barefoot now, her slippers past saving, the boards cool and gritty under her soles, and she stopped outside her sister's door and stood a moment with her hand not quite touching it, listening, no weeping. She had half feared weeping. What came through the panel was worse, the absolute stillness of a person sitting very upright in the dark, waiting to be despised. She knocked once and went in without leave, the way she had gone into that room 10,000 times as a child, and Cassandra was where she had known she would be, at the window seat in their mother's silver tissue, her fair hair still dressed for a betrothal that had ended on the grass, her beautiful face turned to the greying park and swept perfectly, terribly clean of everything. She did not turn. Come to look, Cassandra said. Her voice was even. Very well. Look. I have come to be cold, Rosamond said. It is nearly dawn, and I have been up all night, and I climbed a building, and I would like to sit down, and your fire is the only one lit above stairs. She crossed the room and sat, uninvited, on the hearthrug like a girl, drawing her scraped knees up under the ruin of her skirts, and held her stinging hands out to the small flames. The wood smoke was sweet, applewood. Someone had brought Cassandra applewood, which was a kindness, and Rosamond wondered who among the servants still loved her sister enough for it. I am not going to forgive you, she said to the fire. I want that understood at the outset. Forgiveness is a thing people do from above, and I am sitting on your floor with grazed knees, so it is not on offer. I have come about something else. That turned her. Rosamond heard the silver tissue whisper. You locked me in a tower, Cassandra, she went on, still to the flames, because some things are easier said sideways. You told the hall I had a brain fever. You would have let a bishop marry you to a man under my name and my mind, and never once, she stopped, steadied. And the terrible thing, the thing I have been carrying down the ivy and across the park and through your duke's uncle all night, is that I understood every step of why. Our mother stood us side by side for 25 years and said the elder is the beauty and the younger is the clever one, as though a girl could only ever be the one thing. And you believed her. You believed that all you were was a face, and that a face has a season and then the shop shuts, and that if you did not become something before it closed you would be nothing at all. She looked up at last. You did a wicked thing out of that belief. But the belief is not wicked, Cass. It is only wrong. And our mother taught it to both of us, and I have spent my whole life being the clever one who did not mind being plain. And only tonight, coming out of that yew hedge into 200 candles, did I understand that I minded. I minded so much I could hardly breathe. Cassandra's composure held for the length of one more breath. Then it went, not into weeping, but into something rawer, her mouth working, her hands twisting in the silver until the old tissue creased. "You always had the letters," she said, low and ragged. "You had Papa. He taught you the clocks, and he taught you to think, and he sat you on his knee in the cold workshop, and he never once asked me to sit. Because I could not keep still, and you could, and so you got a mind, and I got this." She gestured down her own beauty with something close to loathing. A thing that gets a woman looked at and never listened to. "Do you know what it is? To be looked at your whole life and never once heard. I wrote to no lonely men, Rose. Nobody ever wanted to argue with me. They wanted to stand me in a window and admire the light. And there it was, the girl who had taught her to plait rushes by the mill stream, come up at last through the woman in silver, and Rosamond's throat closed on 11 years of a grief she had thought was only hers. "Then hear this," she said, and reached up and took her sister's twisting hands and held them still, the way their father had once shown her to hold a mainspring so it could not fly loose and cut. "The Duke's uncle came into the library tonight with a letter 11 years old, out of Bristol, and he means to use it at noon to name me a forger and end this family in the county. And he can only do it because there are 2 doors and he has shut them both. But there is a third thing he never added, and I need you for it, Cassandra, and I would rather cut my hand off than come and ask you the morning after you locked me in a tower, but I have not the luxury, so I am asking. The great-aunt, Aunt Sabine. You have her letters. You have written to her all summer. Does she care which of us wears the coronet? Or does she care only that one of us does?" Cassandra went very still. Something moved behind her wet eyes, a calculation, Rosamond saw, the same swift adding up that ran in all of them, mother's daughters both. Then, slowly, she drew one hand free and reached into the little writing box on the window seat, the rosewood one that had been their grandmother's, and took out a folded letter and held it a moment and laid it in Rosamond's lap. "Read it," she said. "The 3rd page. She wrote it a fortnight since, when the Duke first offered." Her voice had steadied into something Rosamond had not heard from her in years, plain, unperformed, the voice of the girl at the mill stream. "She does not name me once, Rose, not once in 4 pages. She writes a niece, my sister's granddaughter married to a duke. I read it 40 times looking for my own name, and it is not there. I could have been anyone. I locked you in a tower to be a person who could have been anyone." Rosamond unfolded the soft paper. The hand was old and imperious and fond, and the 3rd page ran exactly as Cassandra had said, the coronet, the family Bible, the £11,000 pledged to whichever of my great nieces should be so fortunate, and a duchess to sit for her portrait over my chimney-piece before I am too dim to see it, and no name anywhere at all. "This is the 3rd thing," Rosamond said softly. "This is the part your Duke's uncle never added. Cassandra, this clears the sum. There is money for the winter, whichever of us he weds. He can wed the truth and keep the tenants both. You have been carrying the answer in your writing box all summer." The fire settled. Grey light stood now full in the window, and the first blackbird of the morning began, careless and liquid, in the limes below. "Then it was all for nothing," Cassandra said. She said it without self-pity, which made it worse. The whole wicked business. I could have simply asked her to smile on you, and been the aunt of a duchess instead of a duchess, and kept my sister, and slept. "Yes," Rosamond said. "That is generally how it goes with the things we are most afraid to do without." Her sister looked at her a long moment. Then Cassandra Vane did a thing Rosamond had not seen her do since they were children with skinned knees at the mill. She slid down off the window seat in their mother's silver tissue and sat on the hearthrug beside her, hip to hip, and put her fair head down on Rosamond's grazed shoulder, and said, into the ruined muslin, in the smallest voice in the world, "I am sorry." Not gracefully. I am too tired to be graceful. I am only sorry, Rose. Take the coronet. It was always yours. I only wanted to be the sort of person things were given to. A breath. And I will stand up at noon in front of that dreadful clever uncle and say every word of it myself, so that no one can ever call you the thief. That is the one thing I can still give you. Let me give it. Rosamond closed her eyes. Applewood smoke, and her sister's hair against her cheek smelling of the same rosewater it had smelled of when they were 6, and the blackbird, and the whole enormous mending weight of the morning. That, she said, will cost you more than the money ever could. Yes, come and give it. We will go down together. Noon at Wexcombe came white and shimmering, the heat standing over the park in visible ropes, the roses of the lower garden blown wide and heavy in it, and in the steward's cool north room, with its green bays and its ledgers, Lord Peverell had laid the settlements ready, and the pen inked, precisely as he had promised, side by side upon the blotter, like a well-set table. He rose when they came in, all of them, the whole unlikely procession. Julian Grave in his plain coat, Rosamond washed and mended into a clean-sprigged morning gown, but with the greys still bright along her jaw, and Cassandra, who had put off the silver tissue and come down in unadorned green muslin, with her hair dressed simply. Looking, Rosamond thought, more beautiful than she ever had in the whole armoured season of her ambition. Well, said Lord Peverell, and his kind cold eyes travelled over the 3 of them, and did a swift sum, and did not, for once, look wholly pleased with the answer. The bride mended, the sister demoted, and my nephew wearing the face of a man who has been up all night deciding to disoblige me. Sit, all of you. I dislike being loomed at. We will stand, I think, Julian said. It seems to suit us. It is your uncle's room, Rosamond said, and his pen, and his paper. But it is not, my lord, going to be his sum. You laid it out very handsomely last night. 2 doors shut, ruin behind the 3rd. I have come to show you the 4th wall has a window in it. I climbed out of one yesterday. I have rather a gift for finding them. She set her hands on the back of the reading chair, easy, the way her father had stood over an opened case. You have a letter in your coat. Take it out. I would like it on the table between us, where we can both see it, because you and I are the only 2 people in this house who read the works of things. And I will not do you the discourtesy of pretending you cannot follow me. Something shifted in the beautiful, weathered face, the wariness of a man who has felt a flaw he trusted give the smallest fraction underfoot. He drew out the soft grey letter and laid it on the green baize, unhurried, and Rosamond watched him lay it and thought, he does not yet know he has just put down his only pistol. You believe it damns me, she said. It does the opposite, and you have been too delighted with the first half to turn it over. Your court reader swears this letter was signed Cassandra and penned by a younger hand. Set it beside the 11 weeks His Grace holds from Miss Vane, and the same oath proves one hand wrote all of them, and that hand is mine. Last night my sister told a garden she was the mind you funded. This paper, my lord, your paper, from your own coat, is the one proof in England that she was not, and that I am. You are carrying the authentication of my claim about the county, and calling it my ruin. The room was very quiet. A fly bumbled at the sunny window. Cassandra had gone white, but she stood her ground, and Rosamond loved her for it. And the word forger, Rosamond went on, gentle now, because you do not shout at a man you are dismantling, which you meant to loose in the drawing rooms. Loose it. But you are too exact a man to loose half a thing, and half is all you have. A girl of 16, her father not a month in the churchyard, wrote to a lonely man to talk him out of taking her family's house for a debt. No coin misdirected, no creditor cheated. Mr. Harlan lost an argument and gained a correspondence he treasured to the end of his days, and thanked her for in his own hand. I have that letter too, my lord. Shall I fetch it? You cannot say forger without a clever listener asking whom and why and what was taken, and the true answers are no one, to save a sister and a mother, and nothing at all. That is not a scandal you can spend. It is a ballad, and it makes me a heroine and you the uncle who tried to sell his nephew to Shropshire. Which of us, do you think, does the county forgive? For a long moment Lord Peverell looked at her, and the kindness had quite gone from his face, and what stood in its place was the naked attention of one clockmaker watching another take apart a mechanism he had thought only he understood. "You have left the money," he said at last, very softly. "You are clever, Miss Vane, but I have not heard £11,000 in any of it, and the tenants do not eat proof." "No," Rosamond agreed. "They eat the settlement." Cassandra and her sister stepped forward and laid Aunt Sabine's letter on the green baize beside the grey one, the two papers side by side under the white noon light, and said, in a voice that shook only at the first word, and then steadied like a foot-finding stone, "My great-aunt's own hand, my lord. A fortnight old. Read the third page. She pledges £11,000 to whichever of her great-nieces marries a duke. She does not name me. She does not name my sister. She names a coronet. The money follows the marriage, not the bride. His Grace may wed my sister, and your estate has every penny it needed by Michaelmas, and your 400 people go warm into the winter, and the only thing you lose, my lord, is the pleasure of having arranged it your own way." She lifted her chin, and for one instant she was pure Vane. All of them, the whole stubborn line. "I locked my sister in a tower to be a duchess. I have come down to a steward's office to unlock her. Do not, of all the people in this house, be the one who keeps the door shut for the sake of a sum that was already paid." The fly found the open casement and blundered out into the heat. Somewhere in the stable yard a horse stamped and a pail rang. Lord Peverell stood between the two letters and the three young people, and Rosamond watched him at it, and at it again, looking for the error, the dropped wheel, the place where the mechanism cheated, and find none. Because there was none. Because they had brought him a clean machine, and he was, whatever else, a man who could not lie to a balanced account. He laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, entirely without warmth and entirely genuine, and it was the most alarming thing he had done all night. "Do you know," he said, "in 30 years of arranging the affairs of foolish young men, no one has ever once brought me a better sum than my own, and made me look at it. I find I resent it enormously, and I cannot fault a figure of it." He picked up the grey Harlan letter. Rosamond's whole body went taut, and turned it in his fingers, and then, deliberately, he crossed the small room and held it out to her, into her reach, the worn paper trembling very slightly in the hot, still air. "Yours, I think. It was always yours. I only borrowed it to see what you would do." She took it. The paste-mended corner was soft as cloth under her thumb. She read, without meaning to, the one line her 16-year-old hand had shaped at the top. "I confess I find I would rather be answered than obeyed." And something 11 years old came quietly to rest in her chest. "I withdraw my objection to the marriage," Lord Peverell said, returning to the blotter, "on the sole ground that I have never in my life met a woman I would less like to have arranging against me, and I would infinitely rather she arranged for. Julian." He took up the pen and held it out to his nephew, hilt first, the small silver nib winking. "Your name under mine. The bride is corrected in the deed by my hand, Rosamond, not Cassandra Vane. Sign. Before I remember, I am supposed to be the villain of this." Julian took the pen. But he did not sign at once. He looked across the green baize at Rosamond, and the whole grave, tired length of the summer's writing was in his face, and he said, not low, not private, but plainly, in front of his uncle and her sister, and the open ledgers, and the white blazing noon, "I have wanted, for 11 weeks, to say a thing to Miss Vane that ink would not carry. I find I would rather say it before witnesses than sign it in secret." He set the pen down again. He came round the table. He took both her grazed hands in his, there in the steward's plain room that smelled of tallow and dust and hot green baize, and said, "I love you. I have loved a mind through 6 inches of paper all summer, and I climbed no tower for it, and I am ashamed of that beside what you did, and I mean to spend a very long life making up the difference. Marry me. Not the settlement, not the coronet, me, the man who cannot speak 3 sentences in a row without wanting them back, and who is, God help him, entirely without doubt of you." And Rosamond, muddy no longer, mended, her father's opened clock sight showing her nothing in his face but the true works of the thing, running clean and true. Rosamond laughed, and the laugh came out whole, and she said, "Yes, on my terms, your grace, which I shall put in writing, at length, in a hand you already know rather well." Behind her she heard her sister make a sound that was half a sob and wholly a laugh, and she heard, astonishingly, Lord Peverell murmur, "One imagines this is what comes of educating girls," in the tone of a man conceding a game he has decided he is glad to lose. And Julian bent his grave head and kissed her, once, gently, in the noonday hush, and the whole disastrous glittering machine of the last day at last clicked over into its true and running order. They were married in September, in the little grey church at Wexcombe, when the limes had gone gold and the first apples were down in the long grass of the orchard, and the heat had softened into the honey-coloured warmth of an English autumn. It was a small wedding by ducal standards, which scandalized the county far more than a locked tower ever had. Aunt Sabine came from Shropshire, in a coach like a stagecoach, and wept and got her portrait. Cassandra stood up beside her sister in dove grey, and, halfway through the vows, reached over and squeezed Rosamond's hand exactly as she had done at the millstream a lifetime before, and neither of them was heard to explain to the vicar why they both began, in the middle of a solemn office, quietly to laugh. Lord Peverell signed everything, and stayed to dine, and left the newlyweds a wedding gift that arrived in a long deal case a week after, a French clock, very fine, very old, and stopped. "Take it to bits, read the card," in his exact hand. "I am told you find it soothing. I could not make the wretched thing run, and it offended me to be beaten by an object. Yours, P." Rosamond had it going by candlelight the same evening. All its wheels spread on the library table, where a duke had once knelt to bring his eyes level with hers, while Julian read aloud to her from a bad novel he was pretending to despise. "The Wexcombe living fell vacant at Michaelmas," he observed, some weeks into the new order of things, over the breakfast plate, in the dry voice that had learned, that summer, to find its one small joke, and had never since forgotten the way. "I have been thinking of appointing a deserving young man of good family and sound principle." Rosamond looked up from her chocolate. Across the table her husband's grave mouth was perfectly steady, and his eyes were not, and she felt the old warmth go through her like sun on cold stone. "You have not," she said. "No," he admitted. "I have appointed your curate, the one who did the work of it 9 years while the pluralist drank the income at Bath. He wept, which was awkward for us both, and thanked me, and I told him it was not I who had done it, but a great many arguing letters, and he did not understand me in the least. He reached across and turned her grazed and healed palm up in his, the way he always did now, as though to reassure himself the works were whole. I had begun to fear, once, that I might have married a merely good woman. I am relieved, beyond measure, to report that I did not. Pass the honey, Duchess, and tell me what you would do, had you the giving of a country parish, and no one to please but yourself. I have already told you, said Rosamond. 11 weeks of it. You were not to stop, and I have not stopped yet. Outside the long windows the autumn light lay gold across the park, and away at the edge of it the old grey watchtower stood empty in the trees, its arrow slit dark, its ivy going russet on the north face, holding nothing now but pigeons and the memory of a woman who had once done a sum in the heat, and found, behind every shut door, a window she could climb through into the rest of her life. And that is where I will leave them, at a breakfast table, with a mended clock ticking true on the mantel and the honey being passed, which is, when you come down to it, the whole of what any of us are really after. If you have loved this one, do stay a while by the fire. Tell me in the comments which sister you found yourself cheering for, and whether you guessed the trick of the letter before Rosamond turned it over.